What's up? It's Marco, Sage of Soccer, and today I want to talk a bit about the upcoming CONCACAF U17 tournament. And it's a tournament that I'm pretty excited about. We're going to see a lot of prospects who I think have a ton of potential and could possibly impact the U.S. men's national team in even the near future. But going into that tournament, we need to keep some things in context, and that's how this is a U17 tournament, and the results of this aren't going to be truly telling of this group. Now, there are some times where you have U17 teams who do extremely well, and that signals the success of the program coming up. But a lot of times it could be like our last U17 showing at the U17 World Cup in 2019, where we crashed on the group stage and nobody looked particularly good. But then we got Gio Reyna, Joe Scally, and Ricardo Pepi from that group. And then you have Mexico in 2011, who won the U17 World Cup, but nobody from that team has made their competitive debut for Mexico yet. So it can be a bit of a mixed bag, and I think there's one player who showcases that more than anybody. Going into the U17 World Cup in 2017, Andrew Carleton was one of our highly rated prospects, and it's easy to see why. He made his debut at 16 for Atlanta United in their inaugural season, and he was rated alongside Josh Sargent and Tim Weah as the players to watch heading into the tournament. And Andrew flashed potential at this tournament as well. He was one of our top players, having 2 goals and 3 assists, really leading the charge for the USA team as they crashed out to England in the quarterfinals, who would go on to win the tournament and have some world class players in their team right now. But I think we have to remember at the time, US had just failed to qualify for the World Cup. This was October 2017. And this U17 squad was really giving us a lot of hope that things could get better for the future. And Andrew Carleton was expected to be a big part of the upcoming golden generation. And the hype was on. Andrew started off the 2018 season a bit role with Atlanta before actually falling out of the rotation and playing most of the time with the second team. Now, we should remember that this is the 2018 Atlanta team, which is arguably the best MLS team ever. Miles Robinson and Brandon Vasquez could barely get time with them. But Andrew did get a couple of chances and actually did flash some talent in a couple of his starts. But it was a little bit weird how he just wasn't getting much playing time at all. But on the eve of the championship game, we would find out why. Andrew Carleton was absent from the championship game, and he was actually absent from the celebrations following it as well. And the reason was because he was out partying the night before and posted about it. Tata Martino saw those and punished him for it. Obviously, partying the night before the championship game was not something that you should be doing. He has denied this, though he hasn't really offered another explanation. And with this, the questions of his professionalism really started to take hold. Thankfully for Carlton and U.S. men's national team fans, Tata Martino was hired by Mexico, so he got a fresh start under a new manager, Frank de Boer. I wonder what my opinion on Frank de Boer is. But despite that, things start off well. With Atlanta in the CONCACAF Champions League, they had to rotate the squad a little bit, so he got a lot of playing time to start the season. But then he ended up back on the bench, and by this time, other players his age were starting to play, and he was actually left off the U20 roster for the U.S. men's national team altogether. After this, De Boer came out and said that Carlton had to mature before he could really showcase his quality for Atlanta. And De Boer was proven right in June when Andrew forgot his passport heading into a game against Toronto. This was a breaking point for De Boer, and Carlton was sent to Atlanta United too, and wouldn't play under De Boer again. And that's an understandable breaking point. Carlton has denied this, again, not offering much of an explanation. But this is two coaches now, Tata Martino and Frank de Boer, who have both questioned his professionalism. And at that point, it was starting to really become a pattern and become apparent. In January 2020, Atlanta loaned Carlton out to Indy 11 in the USL. De Boer was still the manager and didn't want Carlton in the first team. And the USL wasn't a great place for him to be, but he started off the season as a starter. But then the pandemic happened, and he was forced into lockdown. And I think somebody might be expecting me to say that this is really the beginning of the end, but it actually wasn't. If anything, the pandemic and lockdown helped him. After this, he got a consistent run of playing time with Indy 11 and was actually starting to showcase his talent a lot more. In fact, things were starting to look up for Carlton, and maybe he could take this momentum, come into Atlanta the next year, and finally start to become the player that. Well, that happened. Atlanta released Carlton actually a little bit before this, and it's easy to see why, with his professionalism issues as well as just the overall baggage that he came with. A decent showing in the USL, not being a star player or anything, wasn't enough to keep him around. In fact, after this, no team would take a chance on him in the MLS or the USL. He bounced around the lower American leagues. He had a small stint in Costa Rica and actually ended up getting a lifeline in 2022 when Landon Donovan in the San Diego Loyal signed him in a move that nobody saw coming. But despite not having any big controversies or not being a bad player, he really didn't showcase the talent that he once had, and it's pretty clear at this point that he's not going to become a national team level player anytime in the near future, and he's almost a non prospect at this point. The point is that we shouldn't be overhyping players coming out of this U17 tournament. With somebody like Carlton, we weren't able to see at the time that the mentality just wasn't there for him to be a professional player. As well, we couldn't see that his athleticism wasn't going to develop enough, and maybe even if things went right, he wouldn't have been good enough anyway. Or maybe it was just the hype did get to him. I mean, he was out partying and there was a hacked Instagram post of him drinking, so maybe there is a little bit to that we shouldn't be overhyping these players. And at the same time, anybody just at this tournament, good performances don't necessarily mean anything. We have Serginho Dest, who wasn't even a starter at the U17 tournament, and he's now a Champions League player. So just keep all of that in context when watching this tournament. It is still going to be fun to watch these players, and we could see something like a Josh Sargent or a Tim Weah burst onto the scene. But just keep this in context, keep everything in check, and don't overhype players from this tournament. That's all I talk about. See ya.